the third foundational philosophy that is really important for qualitative research and has really made school, especially in symbolic interactionism, for instance, is pragmatism. And pragmatism is another reason why you can spend years and years in library reading all kinds of different views on what pragmatism actually is and what forms of pragmatism we can find. Or do we need to call it pragmaticism rather than pragmatism? But I'll just try to give a superficial overview of pragmatism. What is pragmatism? What is so pragmatic about it? Well, pragmatism started in the United States at the end of the 19th century, and central figures in pragmatism are Charles Sanders Peirce, William James and John Dewey, and later George Herbert Mead, and some would say that the Thomases were pragmatists as well. And the central idea of pragmatism is that researchers try to focus completely on practical issues. Now, what are these practical issues then? Well, maybe let's define it negatively. What are not practical issues? Well, non-practical issues are issues that armchair philosophers were thinking about. And just like phenomenologists, pragmatists would focus on, okay, let's look at what is relevant for us, for science, for researchers, for people, and not so much about what is nice to sit and ponder about and have intellectual debates, but are not practical in life, in science, and so on. So, where do these pragmatists look at? Well, they look at all aspects of social life that have practical relevance for an investigation. And they try to get everything that is of practical relevance into this research. So there's not a very small focus of the research. And pragmatists have worked a lot, and especially Charles Sanders Peirce, on logic. How do we use logic in order to do empirical science? And they focused a lot on what is called a fallibilist view of science, which means that they looked at knowledge as temporary. They looked at knowledge as useful as long as it is practical, as long as we can use it. And if it turns out we are wrong, well, we maybe have to put it aside. Or if we are wrong, but it's still useful, then we maybe should use it. So that was a total pragmatic view of knowledge. We do not have to be right per se. No, we can use wrong knowledge as long as it is practical. You don't have to think about the world all the time as a globe. Whereas thinking about the world as flat might be useful sometimes. The central maxim we always read when we read something about pragmatism, and you always hear it when you hear something about pragmatism, is this pragmatist maxim. And that says, consider what effects that might conceivably have practical bearings we conceive the object of our conception to have. So consider that. Then, our conception of these effects is the whole of our conception of the object. As all maxims in social science or in philosophy, you have to think about 3 or 4 times about this one. What does it say? Well, you might remember that other maxim or theorem. If man defines situations as real, they're real in their consequences. The Thomas theorem. This says more or less the same. Our conception of the effects is the whole of our conception of the object. So if we define situations as real, it doesn't really matter if it's real or not. If we define situations as real, they're real in their consequences. So if we define pastoralists turning into elephants, it doesn't matter if it really happened from a pragmatist point of view. It only matters if we believed it happened. And if we believed it happened and it's useful for us, then it is pragmatic. Now again, this is pretty hard. And do we need this? Is David Silverman right by saying we shouldn't be discussing all these philosophical concepts for a course on qualitative research or a book on qualitative research? I guess he's right. At least he's partly right. But many people do, so we need to discuss it. And we need to know it. But do you need to put it in a paper, in a research paper? Well, probably not. Only if necessary. Maybe let's give it a pragmatic thought. If it is practical, you would use it. If it's not, you wouldn't.